Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Constantinopoulos. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. In addition to my role on the QSR team as partner manager, I am also co-president of our Women Employee Resource Group, which is our community to support women and their allies here at Pinterest. I am honored to introduce both of our guests, Rachel Thomas, co-founder and CEO of Lean In, and Julene Allen, founder of Women of Color in the Workplace. Today, they will share their experiences with empowering women in the workplace, intersectionality, and tactics to prevent burnout. Rachel Thomas is CEO of leanin.org, the nonprofit she co-founded with Facebook COO Rachel Sandberg to help women achieve their ambitions and create a more equal world. Under her leadership, Lean In has become a go-to resource for original research, data-backed tools to dismantle systematic bias at work, and the Lean In community has grown to include tens of thousands of small peer support circles in 188 countries. Rachel regularly speaks and writes on issues that affect women and is the host of Tilted, a podcast on the intersection of gender and culture. Julene Allen is a former insurance professional, military veteran, interviewer, author, woman of color facing a disability, and CEO of Women of Color in the Workplace. The new brand provides educational resources, research, and documents the experience of women of color in the workplace to formulate a bridge between the talent and companies. Rachel and Julene, welcome to Pinterest. It's exciting to have you both with us here in conversation.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so excited to kick this off. So, jumping right into it, we'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about who each of you are. Pinterest is the home of inspiration. So where do you drive inspiration from in your current work?
So I drive inspiration from the women in our community and women more broadly. So in terms of the women in our community, obviously this has been an incredibly difficult time for everybody, but particularly women. Who have so much going on at home and at work and are so burned out because of it, which I know is something we're going to talk about a little later. But what we've seen in our global community of women is women really showing up for each other in really meaningful, deep ways. So just a couple examples. In Mumbai, we have a group of women who, when things were very difficult in India during the pandemic, they would stay up around the clock so that anytime a woman in their community needed someone to talk to reach out to, one of them was available to talk after hours, when the kids were asleep, whenever it was. We also, amazing. In Berlin, we have a group who's come together and they are teaching financial literacy and helping women, with their taxes. So again, really stepping up to make sure that women in their community feel taken care of. So that's one thing that inspires me. And the second thing is every year we conduct the Women in the Workplace study with McKinsey and Company. It's the largest study of its kind. And this year, something we've always known to be true at Lean In, and I feel like probably everybody listening has always known to be true, which is that women have superpowers as leaders. We are phenomenal leaders. And so what we see in the data this year is that women are stepping up as the leaders we need right now. They're investing more time in employee well-being, more likely to check in on their teams, more likely to help them balance work-life challenges, and they're twice as likely, senior level women are twice as likely as senior level men to be doing DE&I work outside their formal responsibilities, whether that's recruiting diverse candidates or participating in ERGs or bringing in outside speakers. So one thing I want everybody to hear loud and clear, which I think a lot of us are feeling in our own workplaces, and I'm sure you're feeling at Pinterest, is that women are rising to the moment as the leaders we need right now. So those two things give me a great deal of inspiration.
I absolutely love that.
So what drives me is the gap, the opportunity and gender pay gap for women and women of color. Earlier on in my feminist journey, I started off interviewing Emmy award-winning filmmakers. And what I had learned from those interviews was that there was a gap in funding. And so I had the opportunity to interview these filmmakers because they were seeking exposure for their work. And so they needed someone to tell their story. And so that led me on founding a nonprofit and providing a platform which told these women's stories. Later, I started a Lean In Circle to build community for myself. And at Lean In, as many of you know, they teach women how to advocate for themselves. And this was new news to me since as an insurance professional, I come from the old school background in which you go to work every day, you work hard, you come to work on time, you put your head down. And that was pretty much how you advocated yourself. You navigated the workplace. And so Lean In had all these resources that taught you how to negotiate your pay, how to build a network, and so on. And so I was no stranger to facing a number of barriers at work. I knew that I was getting paid less than my white counterparts, even though at that time, you signed a contract and you don't really supposed to disclose your pay with your colleagues. But I knew based on lifestyle that my colleagues were getting paid much more than I was. And I also faced things like bullying in the workplace, of course, sexual harassment, and something called job segregation. For those of you who do not know what job segregation is when women of color or people of color and women are often pushed into jobs that are lower paid. And then you will see probably men and maybe particularly white men in other roles. And so another unique characteristic of job segregation is you're qualified to be in those higher paying roles, but because you may be a woman or a person of color, you're often pushed into certain departments. So what inspired my work was that I really wanted to do more. It led me on a series of journeys. I don't have time to tell all my stories today. A couple years ago, I facilitated a number of workshops in Chicago, and this was before women of color in the workplace became a brand, became a company. And we had a packed house on a Saturday. There were a bunch of women of color attending our workshops, learning how to advocate for themselves at work. And that was inspiring. That let me know that women of color were eager to succeed and wanted to know how. And so that community is what drives me every day.
I love this. Is so powerful. And I wish I could keep you both all day because this is definitely something that we discuss a lot at Pinterest. So thank you for sharing your inspiration. Moving on to confidence. Confidence is learned. And for women, it tends to be more of a skill we regularly need to practice. How do you practice confidence? And are there any standout moments in your careers that made you more confident? And how do you instill this within your communities? Julene, I'll pass this question to you first, and then Rachel.
Sure. Confidence is learning. It starts very early as parents when we instill confidence in our children, and it starts in those early development stages when children are really small. And I believe it's important for parents to nourish confidence and support a small child's decision making, like things like how they may want to wear their hair that day or the shoes they want to wear. I'll give you a story. When my son was small, I bought all these pairs of shoes. He had to have been about 2 or 3 years old. And I bought multiple pairs of shoes, but it was just these one pair of shoes that he wanted to wear every day. And he refused to wear any of the other shoes. And I just couldn't understand why he wanted to wear these one pair of shoes. And I think he was about 2 or 3, and he really couldn't voice, really why he picked this particular pair of shoes over the others. But he was stalwart on wearing those shoes. And so I had to support those one pair of shoes while the other one sat in the closet that he wanted to wear. So it starts like very early, or even just coaching our children when they want to make bigger decisions, like maybe quitting a football team, and just really coaching them and making sure that these are letting them know that there's a consequence to bigger decisions such as that. And I think it's important for parents to coach children along the way so they become more confident decision makers. And how I became more confident as a decision maker, I came from a family where the roles were very defined for women and men. And so that becomes problematic later because it puts a cap on what we feel we should be doing. And so when we want to lead or take on leadership positions, we might feel a little insecure about taking them on, particularly if we came from families in which didn't advocate leadership or certain type of leadership roles for women. And so what was defining for me was that I had a partner. My ex was someone that supported my decisions. He was also a feminist as well. He thought I was brilliant. So I really think that who you have around you 24/7 is critical. And it's so critical when we have men in our lives that support their daughters and when they support our wives. And that was game changing for me. Another area that was critical for me was the women that I was around. So the more I started to advance in my career, my network started to change. So being around unapologetic, ambitious women who were confident decision makers was critical for me. And so that taught me that, I can run this program or this campaign or take on this big project. And so that was really a game changer for me. And I'm gonna just say one more thing before we move on to Rachel, is that that unsolicited feedback. So there's solicited feedback and then there's unsolicited feedback. There's that solicited feedback when you just ask your colleagues or whoever, how did I do last night at this particular workshop? Did you think I performed well? Or do you think this was a good resource? And no, that type of feedback is really good and helpful. But then there's that voluntary, unsolicited feedback that you get from people, and they send you an email or message or comment and say, hey, Julene, that was a great job. You should connect with so-and-so because I really think this individual would help your program grow even more. So I think those areas in my life were really critical and allowed me to be more confident as a decision maker.
So I agree with so much of what Julene said. Thinking about kids and how to raise kids to be confident is so important. The people who surround you in your life are so important. The one thing I will say, though, I cannot talk about confidence without just taking a minute and debunking the confidence gap just quickly, which is, and I think we all know this as women, but we do not lack confidence. There is nothing inherently different about women. What we are having is a very rational response to growing up and getting different messages from the culture and, and the world around us. We face more headwinds, we face more biases, particularly, women from traditionally underserved, communities or with traditionally underserved identities. And so the response we're having is, if we feel a little less confident, that is actually a natural response to the messages and barriers we're facing. So my advice is always remember that the guy sitting next to you who has, tailwinds and is not getting a lot of the same messages, he thinks he can do it. He believes in his abilities, and do the same for yourself. So kind of that's the first thing. And then the second thing that I have felt that has been really helpful to me over the years is I just do a different cost benefit analysis when I think about taking a risk or going for it than I did when I was younger. So when I was younger, I really wrote down like everything that could go wrong, and really focused on the downsides of doing something. If you do that, you'll look at the list and go, I'm not sure I can do that. I've moved, and now do I write down the downsides? Absolutely. But I spend a lot of time, more time on what could go right for me in my career, in terms of building skills, in terms of how I'll feel about myself if I accomplish this. And I often think when I look at the downsides, I go, I can survive almost any of that happening. And when I look at the upsides, I start to get really excited. And so that's one of the strategies I use to build confidence. Because as we all know, the more you exercise the muscle, the more you build it, the more you take risks, the more, you set off a virtuous cycle. And then in terms of what we do in the, at Lean In, obviously we're a team that's predominantly, not all, but predominantly women. So we all know this research, so we talk about it openly. So that's one thing that helps. And then the second thing is we spend a lot of time celebrating small wins, big wins, and everything in between. And I know it sounds small, but the more you pause as an individual and as a team after you've accomplished something and really soak it in, talk about it, and kind of relish the moment, that actually it builds a lot of confidence as well.
I love the themes. It starts early, starts with systematic norms, breaking the barriers, women supporting women, all of the things we know we're capable of. So thank you guys for both sharing your perspectives. What is your perspective on how companies can do a better job of promoting allyship and intersectionality throughout their organizations? Julene, we'll hand it over to you to begin, and then Rachel.
So what I found with allyship, sometimes people opt out. Sometimes we don't know that there's actually incentives of being an ally. Sure, leaders and managers know that in enforcing or encouraging diversity, equity, inclusion at their companies makes good business. The way companies could look at allyship and promote allyship across the board is encouraging relationship building, promoting, installing peer support programs. And also, if companies don't have peer employee resources group, it's a good idea to install employee resource groups. Also, allyship kind of goes against the whole competitiveness of the workplace. And so I think companies need to look at exploring more team building projects and evaluating employees based on collective work than individual work. And I'm not saying let's do away with individual evaluations for individual performances, but have a balance between the two in which allyship will naturally take shape. Another thing is allyship is good for careers. If we look at the word ally, it comes from alliances. And so when we're supporting someone, if we're in a position of privilege, we're strengthening that person so they can turn around and support us. Furthermore, when we're talking about supporting women of color at work, we need to look at when we're supporting intersectionality initiatives or when we're supporting women of color, everyone benefits. And like I stated before, things like parental leave, flex time is good for every employee. Now we're starting to normalize these type of benefits at work. things like supporting natural hair or kinky hair types. We're creating a space where the workplace is promoting every type of physical characteristic at work.
Julene, I love that connection between ally and alliance, and kind of, that really resonates with me. I hadn't heard that before. What we've seen in our research for the last couple years, and the numbers aren't getting any better, even despite all the conversations we're having around allyship and racial equity and how much it matters. Almost 80% of white employees see themselves as allies to women of color. 80%. But yet, when you start to ask about specific actions of allyship, like speaking up on behalf of racial equity, challenging discrimination or bias when you see it, mentoring or sponsoring a woman of color, the numbers drop like a rock. Only 1 in 10 white employees say they mentor or sponsor just one woman of color. So, at Lean In, we think that gap between intent and action isn't because employees don't want to be allies, it's because they don't actually know what allyship looks like and what to do. So we developed a training called Allyship at Work so that we can help educate employees on what allyship actually looks like. In terms of some advice for what companies can start thinking about, one is, I know that we're all fatigued on training, particularly having gone through the pandemic. There's been a lot of training and everybody's got a lot on their plates. But I do think allyship training, unconscious bias training, anti-racism training, it's all critically important. And we know only about 15% of employees are getting allyship training right now. And of course, it can't be one and done. You've got to figure out how you're incorporating learnings from that training into your culture, into your practices. Are you defining what good behavior looks like, what allyship actually looks like? Have you articulated it in your values or in written norms? And we know that when companies kind of pull learnings into, again, their business practices, it makes a positive impact. So, for example, one really practical thing you can do is send out a bias reminder and or an allyship reminder before hiring and promotions processes to make sure people are really thinking about how bias might show up and how they might be able to show up as allies during that process. So just a couple things to think about. And one of the things, just building off of something Julene said, is we also know that allyship begets allyship. Research shows this. I hate to use the word contagious these days because no one really likes to say contagious, but allyship is indeed contagious. So when you show up as an ally, not only are you helping the person who you're reaching out to or you're advocating for or you're speaking on behalf of, it actually begets allyship. So it sets off a virtuous cycle in your organization. And the one thing to also remember is I hope people are doing allyship for the right reasons. And we know that actually if you're incented because you actually deeply want to make your culture better, you're more likely to show up as an effective ally. But no matter what, it's also helpful to remember that when you speak up on someone's behalf or you advocate for someone, it actually raises your status as well. So being an ally is good for everybody. It's contagious in a good way, and it actually elevates your status in a group. So for people who don't know quite what to do, don't let that be an excuse, because sitting on the sidelines is kind of as bad as not really, you got to get in the game. So you can't sit on the sidelines. You got to start taking action, and you've got to be humble and intentional, and you have to learn as you go.
Yeah, I think those are such powerful recommendations and tools. And it's definitely something that companies can easily incorporate into mid-year self-reviews even. And if folks want to get more active in respective communities or use their voice of privilege more regularly, then companies should have a platform for accountability. So I think those are very tangible and something that we can even noodle on here at Pinterest. So going on to that flip side, Rachel, we know that women are experiencing a lot of burnout right now. Why is this, and what are you personally doing to cope with burnout?
This is a great question. First of all, Julene, thank you for telling me that was your artwork behind, because I was like, is it hers? Is it hers? Did she do that? So thank you for sharing that with us. So I'm going to share some data with you. It's not that burnout isn't deeply personal. It is, and having a real impact on us as individuals, but I do find data validating. So 42% of women this year, when we asked, said that they almost always or always feel burned out. 42%. And I want to be clear, everybody's feeling more burned out regardless of gender, but we're really seeing the numbers grow amongst women, and the gap between women and men has almost doubled since last year. And then the issue is why. So I'm going to state the obvious, but we're doing more work at home on average. So we know that women are 5 times more likely to do all or most of their housework at home. 5 times more likely. That's a big difference. And then we know during the pandemic, you guessed it, everybody's doing more, but women are doing more on top of more. The other thing that I already talked about was that women are stepping up as the leaders we need right now. But what does that mean? That actually means more work. Checking in on teams, helping teams navigate their, work-life challenges, being emotional support for your teams, all the D&I work I talked about. We know that women are more likely to show up as allies in the workplace. All of that takes time and means, an investment. And the other thing that we know, which adds insult to injury, is women are not getting credit for that additional labor right now. It's not being built into performance reviews. It's often going unnoticed. And we know, and we all have felt this, when you're doing extra work and then it's going overlooked and unrewarded, as I said, that kind of adds insult to injury. So we're burned out. It's not going away. And I think it's a real wake-up call for organizations and for team leaders and for managers at any scale team, is really realizing that burnout continues. And it's taking a toll on all employees. And I know so many organizations, including Pinterest, are doing a lot about this, but we need to really keep up the momentum when it comes to trying to address burnout and help our employees get through burnout. In terms of what I am doing as an individual, the first thing sounds so obvious, but just trying to give myself some grace. I go to bed more nights without my whole to-do list cleared than I used to. I sometimes have to let, deadlines slide like a little bit because I just do not have the time between being, a full-time mother and a full-time, CEO. And so it's giving grace. And then how do you let that grace actually trickle down to your organization and across your team, and, really kind of giving everybody grace? I think that's critically important. And then almost counterintuitively, one of the things that I've been doing, which takes more time in my day, but I've been trying to really create space for myself. So somewhat similar to Julene, what are the things that really make me happy and are really carving out something that's for me? It's not for my family. It's not for my team. It's for me. And so the 2 things that I am able to tuck in, not all days, but most days, is I try to do at least 15 minutes of Duolingo. I'm trying to learn Spanish. I'm embarrassed I'm learning at my age, but I'm trying to learn Spanish. And then I have a Peloton. I love getting on my bike. And again, if it's only a 15-minute ride, I'll take it. Any ride is better than no ride. So I usually drag myself out of bed a little bit early every morning. And if I get 15 minutes to Duolingo in and 15 minutes on my bike in, then I can start the day really knowing that I carved out some time and I did something for me.
I am also a Duolingo novice. I'm trying to learn Greek, and it is not easy. So I totally think that's so respectable. And there is no age limit for learning a new language, and a really difficult one at that. But I love that. The sanctity of both meditation and exercise to keep the personal and mental, that's how you show up. So I really love that advice. And I think this really segues us nicely into just thematically how we look at teams and organizations. So when we look at leadership teams at organizations, it often feels very visible which gender is lacking and which underrepresented groups are still not being represented. However, it's often less clear how the pyramid forms in the middle. Can you both speak to the lack of representation for women, especially women of color, at the management level, and what we can do to fix this? Rachel, let's have you share first, then Julene.
Yeah, so I think we have spent so much time talking about the glass ceiling, that invisible barrier women face as they get more senior and they just can't break through it. And in reality, what we see in our research year over year, which is just like a dead hit on your question, is the real issue is what we call the broken rung. So we know that women are far less likely to get promoted to manager. For every 100 men promoted to manager in 2021, only 86 women were promoted to manager. And so what happens is you get more men in that first layer of management, which means at every level in organizations, there are fewer women to promote. So that's, one of the things I think we really need to address and talk about. And listen, I don't want to ever poo-poo progress at any level of organizations. But as you said, where we've seen the most progress over the last 6 or 7 years is in senior leadership and the ranks in organizations. So whether that's because it gets more noticed and there's a little bit of optics at play, whether it's a little bit easier because the numbers are smaller. So, organizations are focusing their energy more at the top. We know that more progress has been made at the top of organizations than in that middle. But if you don't fix that broken rung and don't get more women into middle management, you're not, supporting sustainable progress. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which I know Julene's going to talk about, so I'll just talk about it really quickly, is we know that in the progress we're seeing, women of color are by and large going overlooked. So at every level in the pipeline, women of color are losing more ground than white women, and they're losing more ground than men of the same race and ethnicity. And so what happens is at every level, you lose more women of color. And so when you get up to the C-suite, only 1 in 4 C-suite executives is a woman, and that's not okay. We make up about 50% of the population, but only 1 in 25 C-level executives is a woman of color. And that is not okay. We need to do better. So a couple quick tips from my perspective before I pass it off to Julene. The first is, and I kind of alluded to this, the data say that companies have been focusing more energy on getting bias out of promotions and hiring and making sure those processes are equitable at senior levels. They're kind of forgetting the middle a little bit. So we need a laser focus on what's happening in the middle of the organizations. And, one really practical thing organizations can do is if you're not tracking the outcomes of promotions, you need to start. So we know that only about 65% of companies track the outcomes of promotions. Far more track outcomes of hiring. And we know that only 35% of companies track the outcomes of promotions looking at gender and race and ethnicity, looking at both. And if you're not looking at the intersection of gender and race and ethnicity, that's how women of color are going overlooked. That means that only a third of companies have any visibility into how women of color are being promoted within their organization. And you can't solve problems if you don't see the data and you don't clearly understand them. So just a couple of things to think about solving what I think is a big problem. And again, one of the things we see year over year is I think every organization probably has a broken rung somewhere. It might not be that first step up to manager. It might be senior manager. It might be director, but you've got to find that broken rung and put a laser emphasis on making sure you fix it.
Yeah, the data is so powerful. Thank you.
I don't disagree with anything that Rachel said whatsoever. According to the 2021 Status of Women of Color in the Workplace report, more than half of women of color are opting out of the workplace. They stated they would be opting out within the next 5 years. And then on top of that, we learned that also the women of color that we surveyed, majority of them have post-secondary education. However, they're feeling underutilized and undervalued at their companies. We also know that women of color are disproportionately affected by a pay gap. While white women are on average are making 20% less, Black women are making 37% less, Latinas 45%, or this year it changes 43%. Native women, it's 40%. And then for Asian women, they're suffering from a very unique barrier, even though their pay gap is anywhere between 10 to 15%. So it changes, fluctuates from year to year. Asian women suffer from the model minority myth, or also something called the bamboo ceiling. So even though they have the talent and expertise to be where they are, and they're getting paid higher than their counterparts, they still suffer from advancing to senior levels of positions. And so how do we combat this? How do we combat this? So we really have to further our diversity, equity, inclusion mission at our companies and really think about the fact that each group of women of color are going through these unique experiences. For example, 80% of Black mothers are single breadwinners of their households. Asian American women and Latinx women are more likely to be members of multi-generational households and also be caretakers of their family. So that means things like parental leave, family leave, and flex time are critical to these groups.
Alexis, can I jump in for just a second?
Yeah, of course. Please, please.
Okay, well, I'm so excited by, what Julene's getting at, which is so critically important, is, there's diversity of numbers, right? And that's getting women well represented at every level of the pipeline, and particularly in leadership. And we've got a lot of work to do. But there's inclusion. There's a reason we call it DE&I. You need diversity, you need equity, and you need inclusion. If women, all women don't feel like they belong and they don't feel valued, first of all, you're not going to hang on to them. You're going to have attrition issues. But secondly, it's not an environment where they can really thrive and really bring their best selves. So, one of the things that I was so chagrined by in this year's Women in the Workplace data is that despite pretty bold and applaudable commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, to racial equity, a lot of organizations took big, bold stands. The everyday experiences of women of color are by and large not changing. They face similar types of microaggressions, similar frequencies of microaggressions. And so I do think, like Julene's point is so incredibly important, which is how are we changing the culture of work so that women, and particularly women with traditionally marginalized identities, feel included. So let's get the inclusion right, which is going to take real work and real investment.
I couldn't agree with both of you more. And I feel like it just sums up everything that we've been talking about thematically of confidence. We have it. It's just we're wearing these masks and there's this imposter syndrome that we are feeling that we have to kind of settle into, and not putting ourselves up in the promotions in the same way that our male counterparts would. So I think all of it is super impactful and important. And I really do hope that we are the voices of change. And I'm excited for the future of women. So with that, before we wrap up, we're going to end with some speed lightning round or some fun, fast questions for you both. This is going to be rapid fire style. So I'm going to ask the question. You can say the first one that comes to your mind, and then we're just going to have some fun with this in lieu of Q&A. So, ready? First question. What brings you joy?
Every morning I get to get up every morning and do it all over again and reset. And that's what gives me joy. Just looking up at the sun and knowing having so much gratitude and knowing how much the sun is contributing to our everyday lives. That's what brings me joy. It's very simple stuff. And of course, being a mom of a 23-year-old child, he's an amazing kid, and soon he'll be graduating with an economics degree, and I would be so happy because hopefully he'll get a job, a great job.
Hey, maybe we'll hire an economist at Pinterest somehow.
So what brings me joy? So many things. And one of the things I try to really focus on, which is a little bit what Julene was getting at, which is kind of when I'm experiencing a moment of joy, really taking it in, like noticing the details. So I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, we've been really busy as a family. I have 2 teenagers, so we don't really get to sit on the couch much and watch movies together. Like, it just doesn't happen as much as it used to when they were little. And it was cold out, so we had a fireplace going in the fireplace, and we have a wide couch, so all of us were, across the couch with blankets, and like snacks. And the dog was, on the ground. And I just remember like being so happy, the whole family lined up and just really taking in all the details of it, so that you really get all the benefit of that moment of joy. I think that's so critically important. So it's not that I haven't had lots of moments of joys, but it's really just an example of how do you slow down and almost kind of slow motion them and take them in and really relish them. So much like Julene, it's often around being with family or being with friends and just doing something where you're just truly slowing down and enjoying the moment.
I love that. I feel like that's the one silver lining of COVID, the slowing down and appreciating what's really important. What show are you currently binging?
Leading up to Halloween, I was watching a lot of trashy horror shows, but one of my favorites is Legacies. I don't know if any of you have watched the Vampire Diaries series, and then it led into another series that I can't remember, but now there's Legacies. And yeah, I'm a shameless legacy junkie.
I'll add that to the list.
So I am watching, but you can't call it binge watching anymore because I've caught up. You know how you start binge watching, but then you get to the end and then you've got to watch like everybody else and wait until it comes out. Well, I am now doing that with the morning show, which I think is awesome. So I was binge watching it, and now I'm waiting for the next episode patiently.
I love that. I know now we're so used to binging that we kind of have to pace ourselves. So it's kind of like, all right, I don't want to finish it too soon. Okay, this is a fun one. What is your favorite curse word?
Sadly, it comes right off my lips, but my word is fuck. I use it a lot in a lot of different ways. And then at work, probably I'm more likely to use shit show, which I think can often, capture if something's a cluster or it's going sideways. It's just an evocative way to capture when things aren't going the way you wish they were.
So my favorite curse word is fuck as well. Must be a very popular word for everyone. I use it in traffic. I use it when I bump into things and hurt myself. I use it when I make a mistake. I probably use it at least once a day.
It really is the most versatile word. I think it's the only word that can be a verb, an adjective, a noun. So it's just a fun one. I think that everyone...
Alexis, that's what we'll tell ourselves. It's a flexible word.
Right? It's a flexible word.
Yeah.
I combine it and I do the cluster fuck a lot at work. So that's mine. Okay, our last fun question. Rachel, will have you share yours first, and then Julene. Who was your first concert?
So I am dating myself, but my first concert was the Bangles. Which was super fun. And, as everybody knows, they were one of the first kind of early big, I think we'd call them back then girl bands. It was a great, super fun, great concert. So definitely the Bangles.
I can't remember. And I think it could have been something like Michael Jackson or New Edition. I was a big New Edition fan back in the day. I know millennials probably have never heard of New Edition, but they were a cute all-boy band, and the girls, I think I was about 11 or 12. I think I'm telling my age. But everyone was in love with someone from the New Edition band.
Yes. And for any Gen Z millennial who is listening and tuning in, please listen to the Bangles and New Edition. If you do not know the music, it is totally worth your while. I promise. So now, Julene, do you have any pro tips or advice to share on how you have grown during the pandemic? This can be anything from self-care, morning mantras, or scheduling boundaries.
So what's so interesting about this whole conference is I am a Pinterest. I'm a pinner.
We love that.
Yes. So during the pandemic, I'm also a creative. I've been painting most of my adult years. I didn't go to a traditional art school, but I took a number of classes in art. And so growing up, while my son was growing up, I painted a lot. I painted the walls around the house. I also used to browse estate sales and buy like vintage and antique furniture and bring it home and repaint it. So during the pandemic, I knew it was an opportunity for me to kind of focus on something else, something that was personal to me that I wanted to develop and grow. And so I started learning about furniture art. And I started following a lot of women furniture artists. They're pretty much changing the game in the furniture art movement. If you ever want to learn about furniture artists, Instagram is a great place to kind of browse some of the beautiful pictures of some of the, and Pinterest, of some of the beautiful artwork. And I learned a lot of techniques from many of these women furniture artists. This is something I created in the background. And I grew exponentially. Pretty much my home is an art world. There's probably nothing I didn't recreate in my home. And that was rewarding. I also meditate. So I stepped up my meditation and grew my spirituality. I'm Buddhist, and so I don't go a day without meditating. I think meditation is to the mind similar to physical activity or exercises to the body. And so I think these things were really helpful to me since we were going through a very dark time. It really got me through a really tough time. And I would advise, anyone to find that thing that makes you want to get up in the morning. There's nothing like having that thing that makes you energized and make you want to get out of bed in the morning. And it could be anything like spending time with family or spending time with the people that you love.
I love that. And if nothing else from today, we need to make you a real creator on Pinterest to have all the furniture art show up. And I love that advice because I do think mental health is something that is super critical and not often talked about enough. It was an honor hosting you both as we explored concrete tips for folks to walk away with, ranging from burnout prevention all the way to intersectionality in the workplace. Thank you, Julene and Rachel, for your time, and thanks to everyone tuning in live from the conference all around the world. You can find Rachel Thomas on LinkedIn and check out leanin.org. As for Julene, she's also on LinkedIn and can be found on Instagram, hopefully soon Pinterest creators, at Julene Allen. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of the conference.